Margaret wiped her hands on the small towel she kept in her apron pocket. The old fabric was soft from years of washing, but it still did its job. She looked around the big concert hall one more time. Every seat was clean. Every piece of trash was gone. The floors shined like mirrors under the bright lights. She was tired. Her back hurt from bending over to pick up programs and empty water bottles. Her feet ached in the old black shoes she wore to work every day. But she felt happy inside. Tonight was special. Tonight she would get to listen to real music played by real musicians. Margaret had worked at the Vienna Music Academy for 15 years. Every morning she came in before the sun rose. She cleaned classrooms where young people learned to play piano and violin. She mopped the floors where famous teachers walked. She dusted the windows that looked out at the beautiful old buildings of the city. Most days she was invisible. Students rushed past her in the hallways. They carried their instrument cases and talked about concerts and competitions. Teachers walked by without looking at her. They were busy thinking about lessons and performances. Margaret understood. She knew she was just the cleaning lady to them. But Margaret had a secret. She loved music more than anything in the world. When she cleaned the practice room, she listened to students play. When she worked in the concert hall, she heard the orchestra rehearse. The music made her heart feel light, even when her body was tired from work. Tonight was the biggest event of the year at the academy. Rich people came to give money to the school. Famous musicians came to play. Everyone dressed in expensive clothes and drank wine from crystal glasses. Margaret had volunteered to help clean up after the party. She wanted to hear the music, even if she had to work while listening. She checked her watch. It was almost 7 o'clock. The guests would arrive soon. Margaret hurried to the storage room where she kept her cleaning supplies. She needed to change out of her work uniform and into something nice. In a small bag, she had brought her best dress. It was dark blue with small white flowers. She had bought it at a thrift store 3 years ago for another special event. The dress was not expensive, but it was clean and pretty. She had washed and ironed it carefully that morning. Margaret changed quickly in the small bathroom near the storage room. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun. Her face showed the lines of someone who had worked hard for many years. Her hands were rough from cleaning, but her nails were clean and short. She walked back to the concert hall. Already she could hear voices and laughter. The guests were arriving. Margaret found a chair in the very back corner of the hall. The seat was behind a large column, so she would be hard to see. She could listen to the music without getting in anyone's way. The hall began to fill with people. Margaret watched them from her hidden corner. The women wore beautiful long dresses that probably cost more than Margaret made in a month. Their jewelry sparkled under the lights. The men wore black suits that fit perfectly. Everyone looked important and wealthy. Margaret smoothed her simple dress and tried to sit very still. She did not want anyone to notice her. She was here to listen, not to be seen. The music was what mattered. A woman with blonde hair and a red dress walked past Margaret's corner. She was talking loudly to her friend. "I heard Victor Kozlov will play tonight," she said. "He is the best pianist in all of Europe, maybe the whole world." Margaret knew that name. Victor Kozlov was famous for playing the most difficult pieces perfectly. She had seen his picture in magazines at the grocery store. He was young and handsome. People said he could play any piece of music without making a single mistake. More people filled the seats. Margaret heard different languages being spoken. She recognized German, French, and English. Some people spoke languages she could not understand at all. Everyone seemed excited about the evening ahead. The lights in the hall began to dim. Margaret felt her heart beat faster. Soon the music would begin. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. A man in an expensive suit walked onto the stage. He spoke into a microphone about the music academy. He talked about how important it was to support young musicians. He thanked all the people who had given money to the school. Margaret did not pay much attention to his words. She was waiting for the music. Finally, the man introduced the first performer. A young woman with long black hair came onto the stage, carrying a violin. She wore a white dress that flowed like water when she moved. The pianist who would play with her sat down at the big black piano. The violinist lifted her instrument and began to play. The music was soft and sweet at first. It reminded Margaret of spring mornings when flowers first bloomed in the park. Then the music became stronger and more exciting. It made her think of storms and wild winds. Margaret closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. She forgot about her tired feet. She forgot about the people around her who did not know she existed. She forgot about everything except the beautiful sounds filling the air. When the first piece ended, everyone clapped loudly. Margaret opened her eyes and clapped too. She felt tears on her cheeks. The music had been so beautiful that it made her cry happy tears. More musicians performed. A man played the cello. A woman sang an opera song in Italian. Each performance was wonderful. But Margaret was waiting for Victor Kozlov. She wanted to hear the famous pianist everyone was talking about. During a break between performances, Margaret heard people talking around her. They spoke about the music and the musicians. They talked about which pieces they liked best. Margaret listened but said nothing. She was just happy to be there, sharing this special evening with people who loved music as much as she did. A waiter walked by carrying glasses of wine on a silver tray. He did not offer any to Margaret. She did not mind. She had brought a small bottle of water in her purse. That was all she needed. Margaret looked around the beautiful hall. The walls were covered with gold decorations. Paintings of famous musicians hung in fancy frames. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling like frozen stars. This was a place where magic happened. This was where music came alive. Soon the main event would begin. Victor Kozlov would walk onto that stage and sit at that piano. Margaret would hear him play the most beautiful music in the world. She had waited all day for this moment. She had worked hard all week, looking forward to this night. Margaret settled back in her chair and smiled. She was exactly where she wanted to be. The lights dimmed once more. Margaret heard whispers of excitement all around the concert hall. She leaned forward in her corner seat, trying to see better around the big column that blocked part of her view. A tall man walked onto the stage. Even from far away, Margaret could tell this was Victor Kozlov. He moved with confidence like someone who knew everyone was watching him. His black hair was perfectly styled. His white shirt and black jacket looked expensive and new. He smiled at the crowd, but it was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that said he knew he was better than everyone else. The crowd clapped loudly as Victor walked to the piano. He stood beside the big black instrument and bowed slightly. Then he sat down on the bench and adjusted it until it was exactly right. He placed his hands above the keys and paused. The hall became completely quiet. Margaret could hear her own heartbeat. Then Victor began to play. The music that came from the piano was unlike anything Margaret had ever heard. His fingers moved so fast they looked like a blur. Every note was perfect. The sound filled every corner of the huge hall. It was powerful and exciting and beautiful all at the same time. Victor played a piece by Rachmaninoff. Margaret recognized it because she had heard students practice parts of it many times. But those students could only play small sections. Victor played the entire piece without stopping. His hands seemed to dance across the keys. Sometimes he played so softly that people leaned forward to hear. Other times he played so loudly that Margaret felt the music in her chest. Margaret watched Victor's face as he played. His eyes were closed most of the time. When they were open, he looked serious and focused. He never looked at the audience. He seemed to be in his own world, a world made only of music. The piece lasted almost 30 minutes. During that time, no one in the audience moved. No one coughed or whispered. Everyone was completely captured by the music Victor created. Margaret felt like she was flying. The music lifted her up and carried her away from her hard life. Away from her tired body, away from everything that made her sad. When Victor finished, he lifted his hands from the keys and sat very still for a moment. Then he stood up and faced the audience. The crowd exploded into applause. People stood up and clapped until their hands hurt. Some people shouted, "Bravo!" Others whistled and cheered. Victor smiled that same cold smile. He bowed several times. He knew he had played perfectly. He knew everyone loved his performance. But he did not seem surprised. He acted like this always happened, like everyone always loved him this much. After the applause died down, Victor left the stage. The lights came up a little bit. It was time for the reception. People began to move around and talk. Waiters appeared with trays of wine and small fancy foods. Margaret stayed in her corner seat. She needed a few minutes to come back to earth after hearing such amazing music. She watched the crowd of well-dressed people as they laughed and talked. They all seemed so comfortable in this beautiful place. They belonged here in a way that Margaret never could. She saw Victor come back into the hall. Now he was not on the stage anymore. He was just another guest at the party. People surrounded him immediately. They wanted to tell him how wonderful his playing was. They wanted to shake his hand and take pictures with him. Victor seemed to enjoy all the attention. He laughed loudly at things people said. He held a glass of red wine and took small sips while he talked. Margaret could see that he was used to being the most important person in any room. A group of wealthy-looking people gathered around Victor. Margaret could hear some of their conversation from her corner. They were asking him about his next concert tour. They wanted to know what pieces he would play in different cities. They talked about famous orchestras and conductors like they were old friends. "The piece you played tonight was incredible," said a woman with diamonds around her neck. "I have never heard anyone play Rachmaninoff with such power." Victor nodded like this was obvious. "Rachmaninoff requires complete technical control," he said. "Most pianists cannot handle the difficulty, but for me, it is natural." Margaret noticed how Victor talked about other musicians. He did not say nice things about them. When someone mentioned another famous pianist, Victor would find something wrong with that person's playing. He seemed to think no one could play as well as he could. "I heard Maria Santos play that same piece last month in Paris," said a man with a gray beard. "She was quite good." Victor made a face like he had tasted something bad. "Maria Santos has technique, but no soul," he said. "She plays the notes correctly, but she does not understand the music. There is a difference between playing music and making music." The people around him nodded and agreed, even though many of them probably liked Maria Santos just fine. They wanted to stay on Victor's good side. They wanted him to think they understood music as well as he did. Margaret watched all this from her corner. She felt uncomfortable with how Victor talked about other musicians. She had heard Maria Santos play on the radio once, and she thought the woman was wonderful. But Margaret was just a cleaning lady. What did she know about music compared to a famous pianist like Victor? As the evening went on, Victor drank more wine. His voice got a little louder. His laugh got a little sharper. He seemed to enjoy making jokes about people who were not there to defend themselves. "Last week I heard a student at the conservatory in London," Victor told his group. "The poor boy thought he could play Chopin. It was like watching someone try to paint a masterpiece with their feet." Everyone laughed at his joke. Margaret did not think it was funny. She remembered being young and learning to play difficult pieces. It was hard work. Everyone made mistakes when they were learning. That was normal. That was how people got better. Victor looked around the room while he talked. His eyes moved across the crowd like he was looking for something interesting. Most of the people here were rich patrons of the arts, but they were not musicians themselves. Victor seemed a little bored with their admiration. Maybe he wanted someone who could really understand music to talk to. Then someone in his group said something that made Victor's eyes light up with mischief. "You know," said a woman with red hair, "I think everyone here tonight loves music so much. Even the staff members seem to be enjoying themselves. I saw the cleaning lady listening very carefully to your performance. She looked like she was about to cry from how beautiful it was." Victor turned to look where the woman was pointing. Margaret's heart jumped. The woman was pointing toward her corner. Could they see her back there? "Ah, yes, the help does seem to appreciate fine music," Victor said with a laugh. How touching that even the working class can recognize true artistry when they hear it. Margaret felt her face get hot. She wanted to disappear into her chair, but she also felt angry. Why did Victor have to say even the working class like that? Like people who worked with their hands could not understand beautiful things? Wonder if she thinks she could do better, Victor continued, and his group laughed again. Perhaps she has been listening to students practice for so long that she thinks she has learned something. Margaret's hands tightened in her lap. She wished she could leave, but she would have to walk past Victor's group to get to the exit. She decided to stay very still and hope they would forget about her. But Victor was just getting started. The wine and the attention had made him feel very bold, and he was looking for a way to entertain his audience that would be even better than just making jokes about musicians who were not there. Margaret did not know it yet, but Victor was about to make her the center of attention in a way she never wanted to be. Victor set down his wine glass on a nearby table. The red liquid sloshed a little, and some drops fell onto the white tablecloth. He did not seem to care. His eyes stayed focused on Margaret's corner, where she sat very still, hoping to remain invisible. "You know what would be entertaining?" Victor said to his group of admirers. His voice was getting louder, and other people nearby began to listen. "We should ask our devoted cleaning lady to share her musical knowledge with us." The people around him laughed nervously. Some of them looked uncomfortable, but they did not want to disagree with the famous pianist. They had paid a lot of money to be at this event, and they wanted to stay in Victor's good graces. "Oh, Victor, you are so funny," said the woman with diamonds. But her laugh sounded forced, like she was not sure this was a good idea. Victor was not finished. The wine had made him feel bold and playful, but in a mean way. He liked being the center of attention, and he had found a new way to make everyone look at him. "I am serious," he said, walking a few steps toward Margaret's corner. "This woman has been listening to music at this academy for years. She has heard the best teachers and students. Surely she has learned something. Maybe she thinks she could teach us all a thing or two." More people in the hall were starting to notice what was happening. Conversations got quieter as people turned to watch Victor. Some looked curious. Others looked worried. A few people tried to change the subject, but Victor would not let them. Margaret felt like her heart was going to jump out of her chest. She could see Victor looking right at her now. There was no way to hide anymore. She wanted to run, but her legs felt frozen. She had never been the center of attention like this, and it was the most frightening thing she had ever experienced. "Come, now," Victor called out, his voice carrying across the hall. "Do not be shy. We are all friends here. We all love music." An older man in Victor's group put a hand on the pianist's arm. "Perhaps we should let the woman enjoy the evening in peace," he said quietly, but Victor shook off his hand. "Nonsense," Victor said. "I am sure she would love to share her thoughts about tonight's performance. After all, she had the best seat in the house for listening." Margaret tried to make herself smaller in her chair. She looked around desperately, hoping to find another exit. But the hall was crowded now, and there was no way to leave without walking past Victor and all the people who were staring at her. Victor began walking toward her corner. His group followed behind him like a parade. Other guests stepped aside to let them pass, then followed at a distance. It was like Victor was a magnet pulling everyone in the room toward Margaret's hiding place. "Please," Margaret whispered, but her voice was too quiet for anyone to hear. She felt tears starting in her eyes, but she tried to hold them back. She did not want to cry in front of all these important people. When Victor reached her corner, he stopped and looked down at her. Up close, Margaret could see that his eyes were bright from the wine. He was smiling, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who thought he was very clever. "Here she is," Victor announced to the crowd that had gathered behind him. "Our most dedicated listener. Tell me, my dear woman, what did you think of tonight's performance?" Margaret looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She had never been so scared in her entire life. All these rich, important people were staring at her, waiting to hear what she would say. It was beautiful," she managed to whisper. "Beautiful," Victor repeated loudly, like he was announcing something wonderful. "She says it was beautiful, and I am sure she is right. But tell us more. What did you think of my interpretation of the Rachmaninoff? Did I capture the composer's intention?" Margaret stared at him. She did not understand why he was asking her these questions. She was just a cleaning lady. Why did he care what she thought about his music? I do not know, she said. I just liked listening to it. The people around them began to whisper to each other. Some looked embarrassed for Margaret. Others seemed to think Victor was being cruel, but no one said anything to stop him. Victor turned to face his audience. She just liked listening to it, he repeated. How wonderfully simple music appreciation in its purest form. His tone made it clear that he was making fun of her. Then Victor had an idea that made his eyes light up with excitement. It was an idea that would give him the most entertainment he had had all evening. It was also an idea that would change everything. You know, he said, turning back to Margaret. I have been thinking. You have been listening to music here for so many years. You have heard students practice. You have heard teachers give lessons. You must have learned something about playing piano. Margaret shook her head quickly. No, sir, I just clean. I just listen sometimes while I work. Oh, come now, Victor said with that cruel smile. Do not be modest. I bet you have always wondered what it would feel like to sit at a real concert piano, to play for a real audience. The crowd was completely quiet now. Everyone was watching this strange scene unfold. Margaret looked around at all the faces staring at her. Some people looked curious. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked like they were waiting for something entertaining to happen. Here is what I propose, Victor said, raising his voice so everyone in the hall could hear him. Our friend here should give us a little performance. She has been such a devoted listener. It would be only fair to let her try being the performer for once. Oh no, Margaret said quickly. I could not. I do not play piano. Victor laughed. Everyone can play something, maybe chopsticks or happy birthday, something simple that matches your level of expertise. Several people in the crowd looked uncomfortable with Victor's words. They could hear the meanness in his voice. But Victor was a famous musician, and they did not want to argue with him. I really cannot, Margaret said again. Her voice was shaking now. Please, I just want to listen to the music. But Victor was not going to give up. He had found his entertainment for the evening, and he was going to see it through. He turned to the crowd with his arms spread wide. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, I think we should encourage our shy friend here to share her musical talents with us. After all, this is a night to celebrate music in all its forms. Some people in the crowd began to clap politely. They did not want to be rude, even though they felt uncomfortable with what was happening. Their clapping made Victor feel like everyone was supporting his idea. Come, Victor said, reaching out his hand toward Margaret. Just one simple song. What could it hurt? We are all music lovers here. We will appreciate any effort you make. Margaret looked at his outstretched hand, like it was a snake that might bite her. She did not want to take it. She did not want to stand up. She did not want all these people to keep looking at her. But Victor was not going to let her say no. He had an audience now, and he was going to give them a show. Even if it meant embarrassing a poor cleaning lady who just wanted to listen to beautiful music in peace. Margaret realized that there was no way out of this situation. Victor was not going to stop until he got what he wanted. All these people were waiting to see what would happen. She could sit there and make everyone uncomfortable, or she could stand up and try to end this as quickly as possible. Very slowly, with her hands shaking like leaves in the wind, Margaret reached out and took Victor's hand. Margaret's hand felt cold and small in Victor's warm grip. He pulled gently, helping her stand up from her corner chair. Her legs felt weak, like they might not hold her weight. She had to grab the back of the chair with her other hand to steady herself. There we go, Victor said in a loud, cheerful voice. Nothing to be afraid of. We are all friends here. But Margaret did not feel like these people were her friends. She felt like a mouse surrounded by cats, all waiting to see what would happen to her. Her heart was beating so fast that she could hear it in her ears. Victor kept holding her hand as he led her away from the corner. Margaret had no choice but to follow him. Her legs moved automatically, one step after another, even though her mind was screaming at her to run away. The crowd parted to make a path for them. Margaret could feel everyone's eyes on her as she walked. She kept her head down, looking at the shiny marble floor instead of at the faces around her. She could hear people whispering, but she could not make out the words. Some of the whispers sounded surprised. Others sounded excited, like people were looking forward to a show. A few sounded worried or uncomfortable, but no one spoke up to stop what was happening. The walk from her corner to the stage felt like the longest walk of Margaret's life. Each step made her feel more nervous and more trapped. Victor walked beside her, still smiling that cold smile, still holding her hand, like they were old friends. "You know," Victor said to her as they walked, loud enough for people nearby to hear, "I think this will be good for you. Everyone should have a chance to perform. It builds character." Margaret wanted to tell him that she did not need to build character. She wanted to say that she was perfectly happy listening to other people play. But her throat felt tight and she could not get any words out. When they reached the edge of the stage, Victor stopped. The big black piano sat in the center, looking huge and important under the bright lights. Margaret stared at it with wide eyes. She had seen this piano many times while cleaning, but she had never been this close to it during an actual performance. "Up we go," Victor said, gesturing toward the steps that led onto the stage. Margaret looked up at those steps like they led to the top of a mountain. Each one seemed impossibly high, but Victor was waiting, and the crowd was watching. So she lifted her foot and took the first step. Her old black shoes made clicking sounds on the wooden steps. The sounds seemed very loud in the quiet hall. Margaret gripped the handrail tightly, afraid she might fall. Her legs were shaking so much that she was not sure they would carry her to the top. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Finally, she was standing on the stage. The lights up here were much brighter than in the audience. Margaret could see the crowd spread out below her, hundreds of faces all looking up at her with curiosity and expectation. She had never seen so many people at once, and she had certainly never had so many people looking at her. Victor stepped up onto the stage behind her. He put his hand on her back and guided her toward the piano. The instrument looked even bigger up close. The black surface was so shiny that Margaret could see her reflection in it. She looked small and frightened and out of place. "Here we are," Victor announced to the crowd. "Our brave volunteer is about to share her musical talents with us." Margaret stood beside the piano bench, not sure what to do next. She had never performed in front of people before. She did not know how to act, or where to look or what to say. Victor pulled out the bench for her like a gentleman helping a lady at a fancy restaurant. "Please have a seat," he said with exaggerated politeness. Margaret looked down at the bench. It was covered in black leather and looked very expensive. She was afraid to sit on it with her simple dress and her work-worn hands. What if she made it dirty? What if she broke something? But Victor was waiting, and the crowd was waiting, so Margaret carefully sat down on the edge of the bench. She kept her back very straight and her hands folded in her lap. She looked out at the audience and saw hundreds of eyes staring back at her. The lights were so bright that they hurt her eyes a little. She could not see the back of the hall very well, but she could see the people in the front rows clearly. Some of them looked curious, some looked amused. A few looked sorry for her. Victor stood beside the piano, one hand resting on its shiny surface. "Now then," he said to Margaret, "what would you like to play for us? Something simple, I imagine. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, perhaps? Or maybe you know, Mary Had a Little Lamb?" The crowd chuckled at his suggestions. Margaret felt her face turn red with embarrassment. Victor was making it clear that he expected her to play children's songs like she was a little girl at her first piano lesson. Margaret started to say, then stopped. Her voice sounded strange and small with all those people listening. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I have not played in a very long time." "Oh, that is perfectly fine," Victor said with fake kindness. "We all understand. You are not a professional musician. No one expects perfection. Just play whatever you can remember." Margaret looked down at the piano keys. There were so many of them, black and white, stretching out in front of her like a smile with too many teeth. Her hands felt heavy in her lap, like they were made of stone. She could hear people in the audience shifting in their seats. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered something to their neighbor. They were getting impatient, waiting for her to do something. Margaret lifted her hands slowly and placed them above the keys, not quite touching them yet. Her fingers were shaking. She could see the trembling clearly in the bright stage lights. "Take your time," Victor said, but his voice had a hint of impatience in it now. He was starting to wonder if this had been a good idea. Maybe the cleaning lady really could not play anything at all. Maybe this would be boring instead of entertaining. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment. She tried to calm her racing heart. She tried to forget about all the people watching her. She tried to remember what it felt like to love music instead of being afraid of it. When she opened her eyes, she looked out at the crowd one more time. These people expected her to embarrass herself. They expected her to fumble through a simple children's song and then hurry off the stage in shame. Victor expected the same thing. He was probably already thinking about how he would laugh about this later. How he would tell other famous musicians about the time he made a cleaning lady try to play piano at a fancy concert. Margaret took a deep breath. Her hands were still shaking, but she lowered them until her fingers touched the keys. The keys felt cool and smooth under her fingertips, familiar in a way that surprised her. She sat there for a moment, not moving, just feeling the keys under her hands. The hall was completely quiet now. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Margaret thought about all the years she had spent listening to music while she cleaned, all the beautiful pieces she had heard students practice, all the concerts she had enjoyed from her corner seat. Music had been the bright spot in her hard life, the thing that made everything else worth enduring. Now Victor wanted to take that away from her. He wanted to make music into something embarrassing, something that would make people laugh at her. Margaret pressed down on one key, very softly. A single note rang out in the quiet hall. It was a beautiful sound, clear and pure. She pressed, another key, then another. The crowd leaned forward, waiting to hear what song she would play. Victor stood nearby with his arms crossed, waiting to see how badly she would embarrass herself. But Margaret had a secret that none of them knew. She had not told Victor the complete truth when she said she had not played in a long time. She had not told him about the part of her life that she had buried so deep that she hardly ever thought about it anymore. Margaret's fingers found their positions on the keys. Her hands stopped shaking. Her breathing became steady. And then she began to play. The first notes that came from the piano were not what anyone expected. Instead of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star or some other simple children's song, Margaret began to play something much more complex and beautiful. Her fingers moved across the keys with a grace that shocked everyone watching. The music that filled the hall was rich and deep and full of emotion. It was not the fumbling attempt of someone who did not know how to play. It was the playing of someone who understood music in their very soul. Victor's smile disappeared from his face. His mouth fell open in surprise. This was not what was supposed to happen. The cleaning lady was supposed to embarrass herself, not play like a real musician. The crowd fell into complete silence. People who had been whispering and shifting in their seats became perfectly still. Everyone was listening with amazement to the beautiful music coming from Margaret's hands. Margaret played the opening of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces in all of piano music. Professional pianists spent years learning to play it well. Yet here was a cleaning lady playing it like she had been born to it. Her fingers moved with incredible speed and precision. Every note was perfect. Every phrase was shaped with careful attention to the music's meaning. She played with a touch that was sometimes soft as a whisper, sometimes strong as thunder, but always exactly right for the music. As Margaret played, something amazing happened to her. All her fear disappeared. All her nervousness melted away. She forgot about the bright lights and the watching crowd. She forgot about Victor's cruel joke and her own embarrassment. There was nothing in the world except the music flowing through her fingers. Her body swayed slightly as she played, moving with the rhythm of the music. Her eyes were closed and her face showed a peace and joy that no one in the audience had ever seen from her before. This was not the frightened cleaning lady they had watched walk onto the stage. This was a true musician, lost in the beauty of her art. Victor stood frozen beside the piano. He could not believe what he was hearing. This woman, this simple cleaning lady, who wore old clothes and worked with her hands, was playing Chopin better than many professional pianists he knew. Her technique was flawless. Her musical understanding was deep and mature. Where had this come from? In the audience, people began to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary. The woman with diamonds put her hand over her mouth in shock. The man with the gray beard leaned forward in his seat, his eyes wide with wonder. Throughout the hall, people sat in amazement as the music washed over them. Margaret's playing had a quality that was rare even among great musicians. She did not just play the notes correctly. She made the music come alive. Every phrase told a story, every melody carried deep emotion. She played like someone who had lived through joy and sorrow, and had found a way to put all of human experience into the music. The difficult passages that made most pianists sweat and struggle seemed effortless under Margaret's fingers. Her hands moved like dancers across the keys. She played rapid scales that sounded like water flowing over stones. She played powerful chords that filled the hall with rich, full sound. As the first section of the piece came to an end, Margaret opened her eyes for just a moment. She saw the shocked faces in the audience. She saw Victor standing beside her with his mouth still open in amazement. But instead of stopping, instead of being frightened again, she smiled slightly and continued playing. She moved into the second section of the ballade, where the music became even more complex and demanding. Her left hand played a steady, rolling bass line while her right hand sang out a beautiful melody above it. The two hands worked together like they were having a conversation, answering each other with musical phrases. People in the audience began to have tears in their eyes. The music was so beautiful and Margaret's playing was so full of feeling that it touched something deep inside everyone who heard it. This was not just skillful playing. This was art of the highest level. Victor's mind was racing. How was this possible? Where had this woman learned to play like this? He had made jokes about her musical knowledge, but clearly she knew more about music than he had ever imagined. Her playing showed years of serious training and natural talent of the highest level. As Margaret continued to play, more people in the audience began to stand up. They could not remain seated while listening to such incredible music. They stood, in respect and amazement, watching this mysterious woman who had hidden her extraordinary gift for so long. The cleaning staff who worked with Margaret every day were in the audience too, helping with the evening service. They stood in the back of the hall with their mouths open, unable to believe what they were seeing and hearing. This was Margaret, who cleaned toilets and mopped floors with them every day. How could she play piano like the greatest musicians in the world? Margaret played through the most difficult section of the piece, where the music required her to play different rhythms with each hand, while also bringing out a melody that wove between them. Her fingers flew across the keys with incredible speed and accuracy. Every note was clear and perfectly timed. Victor found himself listening with professional attention, analyzing her technique. Her hand position was perfect. Her pedaling was subtle and exactly right. Her understanding of the musical structure was sophisticated and mature. This was not the playing of someone who had learned from listening to students practice. This was the playing of someone who had received the finest musical education. But how could that be? She was a cleaning lady. She worked at the academy but as staff, not as a student or teacher. Victor had never seen her in any of the music classes or master classes. He had never heard anyone mention her as a musician. As Margaret reached the climactic section of the ballade, her playing became even more powerful and moving. The music filled every corner of the huge hall. It seemed to lift everyone present up and carry them away to a place where only beauty existed. Her face showed the deep concentration of a master musician, but also the joy of someone doing what they loved most in the world. This was where Margaret truly belonged, at a piano, making music that touched people's hearts. The audience was completely captivated. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone was held spellbound by the incredible music flowing from Margaret's hands. Victor realized that his cruel joke had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Instead of embarrassing Margaret, he had given her a chance to reveal her extraordinary gift to the world. Instead of making himself look clever and superior, he had shown everyone that he had judged someone based on their job and appearance, instead of their true abilities. As Margaret played the final phrases of the first piece, building to a powerful and emotional conclusion, Victor knew that nothing would ever be the same again. This was not just a surprising performance. This was a moment that would change everything for Margaret, for him, and for everyone who was lucky enough to witness it. The last notes of the ballad rang out in the silent hall. Margaret lifted her hands from the keys and sat very still, her eyes closed, catching her breath after the intense performance. For a moment, the entire hall remained in complete silence. Then, like a dam bursting, the audience erupted into the loudest and most heartfelt applause any of them had ever given. The applause started like a whisper and grew into a roar. One person began clapping, then two, then 10, then everyone in the entire hall was applauding with an energy and excitement that shook the building. People were not just clapping politely, like they had for Victor earlier. They were clapping with their whole hearts, with amazement and joy and respect. Margaret opened her eyes slowly, like someone waking up from a beautiful dream. The sound of the applause seemed to surprise her. She looked out at the audience and saw something she had never seen before in her entire life. Hundreds of people were standing up and clapping for her. For Margaret, the cleaning lady. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. She had forgotten what it felt like to share music with other people. She had forgotten the incredible feeling of touching people's hearts through her playing. For so many years, music had been her private treasure, something she enjoyed alone while she worked. Now she remembered why she had loved performing when she was young. Victor stood beside the piano like a statue. His face was pale and his eyes were wide with shock. He could not move or speak or think clearly. Everything he thought he knew about music and talent and worth had been turned upside down in the space of a few minutes. The woman with diamonds was crying openly, not caring that her makeup was running down her face. She had heard many famous musicians play, but she had never heard anything as moving as Margaret's performance. The music had reached into her heart and touched something deep inside that she had almost forgotten existed. The man with the gray beard was shaking his head in wonder. He was a music critic who had attended thousands of concerts in his life. He had heard the greatest pianists in the world perform in the most famous halls, but he had never witnessed anything like what had just happened. This was not just excellent playing, this was a miracle. Throughout the hall, people were having the same reaction. They clapped until their hands were sore. They shouted bravo and magnificent. Some people were laughing with joy. Others were crying with emotion. Everyone was changed by what they had experienced. Margaret sat at the piano, overwhelmed by the response. She had played that piece hundreds of times in her mind over the years, imagining what it would sound like on a real piano in a real concert hall, but she had never imagined that people would react like this. She had never dreamed that her music could make so many people so happy. The applause continued for several minutes. People did not want it to end because they did not want this magical moment to end. They wanted to show Margaret how much her playing had meant to them. They wanted her to know that she had given them a gift they would never forget. Finally, the applause began to quiet down a little. But instead of sitting down, people started calling out requests. More, someone shouted from the back of the hall. Please play something else, called out another voice. Do not stop, yelled a third person. Margaret looked around the hall in amazement. These people wanted to hear her play more music. They did not want her to leave the stage. They wanted her to continue sharing her gift with them. She looked over at Victor, who was still standing beside the piano in shock. His face showed confusion and embarrassment and something that might have been shame. He had expected to humiliate her, but instead he had been the one who was humiliated. His cruel joke had revealed his own smallness and her incredible greatness. Margaret turned back to the piano keys. Her hands were not shaking anymore. She felt calm and confident and full of joy. This was where she belonged. This was what she was meant to do. The music was flowing through her like a river that had finally found its way to the sea. She placed her fingers on the keys again and began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune. This piece was completely different from the powerful Chopin ballade. It was soft and dreamy and mysterious, like moonlight shining on water. The audience fell silent again, completely captivated by the change in mood. Margaret's touch on the keys was incredibly delicate. Each note seemed to float in the air like a bubble. The music painted pictures in people's minds of peaceful nights and gentle breezes and quiet beauty. As she played, Margaret felt like she was sharing her deepest feelings with everyone in the hall. This piece had always been special to her. During her hardest days at work, when her back ached and her heart felt heavy, she would hum this melody to herself. It reminded her that there was still beauty in the world, even when life was difficult. Her playing of Clair de Lune was so beautiful that it seemed to transform the entire concert hall. The bright lights seemed softer. The formal atmosphere became warm and intimate. Everyone felt like they were sharing a private moment with Margaret, like she was playing just for them. Victor listened with growing amazement and growing shame. Margaret's musical sensitivity was extraordinary. She did not just play the notes that Debussy had written. She understood the composer's intentions and brought them to life with her own deep emotions. This was the kind of playing that Victor had always tried to achieve but had never quite reached. He realized that in all his years of performing, he had focused on technical perfection and impressive displays of skill. But he had never learned to touch people's hearts the way Margaret was doing right now. Her playing was more than perfect technique. It was pure communication from one human soul to many others. When Margaret finished Clair de Lune, the applause was different than before. It was quieter but deeper, full of respect and gratitude. People clapped gently, like they were afraid to break the spell that her music had cast over the room. Some people in the audience were quietly crying. Others sat in peaceful silence, still lost in the beauty of what they had heard. The music had affected everyone in a different way, but everyone had been affected. Margaret looked out at all the faces in the crowd. She saw wonder and appreciation and love. These people had accepted her music with open hearts. They had not cared that she was a cleaning lady, or that she wore a simple dress, or that her hands were rough from years of hard work. They had only cared about the beauty she had shared with them. For the first time in many years, Margaret felt truly valued, not for her work cleaning floors and emptying trash cans, but for the gift that God had given her and that she had kept hidden for so long. The applause gradually died down, but people remained standing. They were waiting to see if Margaret would play more. They hoped this incredible evening would continue. Margaret looked at Victor, who was still standing beside the piano. His earlier confidence and arrogance were completely gone. He looked like a man who had learned something important about himself and did not like what he had discovered. "Would you like me to play something else?" Margaret asked him quietly, so only he could hear. Victor stared at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back from the piano and gestured toward it with his hand. "Please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The piano is yours." Margaret smiled at him with kindness and understanding. She could see that he was embarrassed and ashamed of how he had treated her. But she was not angry with him anymore. His cruelty had led to this moment, and she was grateful for this chance to share her music with the world again. She turned back to the keys and began to play once more. This time, she chose a piece that would tell everyone her story without her having to say a single word. As Margaret's hands found their place on the keys for the third time that evening, she chose to play Bach's Goldberg Variations. This was not just any piece of music. It was one of the most complex and beautiful works ever written for piano, requiring years of study and a lifetime of musical understanding to perform well. The opening notes filled the hall with their mathematical perfection and emotional depth. Bach had written this music to tell a story of human experience, from simple beginnings through incredible complexity and back to peaceful resolution. It was the perfect choice for Margaret to share her own story. As she played, people in the audience began to understand that they were not just hearing a surprising performance by a talented amateur. They were listening to a master musician, someone whose skill and understanding were at the highest professional level. Victor's hands were shaking as he listened. He recognized every variation, every subtle detail of Margaret's interpretation. She was playing with the kind of deep musical knowledge that only came from years of serious training with the world's best teachers. This was impossible. How could a cleaning lady play like this? A woman in the front row whispered to her husband, "My God, she plays like Martha Argerich." Martha Argerich was one of the greatest pianists alive, famous around the world for her incredible skill and musical sensitivity. Margaret continued through the variations, each one showing a different aspect of her musical personality. Some were playful and light, dancing through the keys like laughter. Others were deep and serious, exploring the darker emotions of human life. A few were so technically difficult that most professional pianists struggled with them, yet Margaret played them with ease and grace. As the music continued, Margaret felt herself transported back in time. She was no longer a 67-year-old cleaning lady in a simple blue dress. She was young again, sitting at her teacher's piano in Vienna, learning these same variations when she was just 20 years old. Her teacher had been Professor Heinrich Müller, one of the most respected piano instructors in Europe. He had told her that she had the hands and heart of a great musician. He had said that she could have a brilliant career performing on stages around the world. He had been preparing her for her debut concert when everything changed. Margaret's parents had become ill at the same time. Her father had suffered a stroke that left him unable to work. Her mother had developed a serious heart condition that required expensive treatment and constant care. As the only child, Margaret had no choice but to give up her musical dreams and find work to support her family. She had sold her piano to pay for her mother's medicine. She had taken a job cleaning offices at night so she could care for her parents during the day. She had promised herself it would only be temporary, that she would return to music once her parents recovered. But her parents never fully recovered. For 20 years, Margaret had worked multiple jobs and cared for them until they died. By then she was 40 years old and felt too old and too tired to restart her musical career. She had taken the job at the music academy because it allowed her to be around music again, even if she could not make it herself. For 27 more years, she had listened to other people make the music she had once dreamed of making. She had kept her musical knowledge alive by listening carefully to every lesson and every practice session. She had studied the students' techniques and learned from their mistakes. She had memorized hundreds of pieces just by hearing them played, over and over. But she had never touched a piano again until tonight. As Margaret played the final variations of the Bach piece, her story became clear to everyone listening. This was not a cleaning lady who had learned a few songs by ear. This was a trained musician, someone who had sacrificed her dreams for her family and had carried her gift in secret for nearly 50 years. The music grew more and more beautiful as Margaret approached the end of the piece. Each note was filled with all the longing and loss and love she had felt during her years of silence. She was not just playing Bach's music, she was playing her own life story. Victor watched her hands move across the keys and finally understood what real musicianship looked like. Margaret did not play to show off her technique or to impress people with her skill. She played to share something beautiful with the world. She played because music was part of her soul, something she could not live without. When the final notes of the Bach piece faded away, the hall remained in complete silence for several long moments. People were so moved by what they had heard that they could not immediately react. They needed time to process the incredible experience they had just shared. Then, slowly, people began to stand again. The applause started quietly and grew into something even more powerful than before. People were not just appreciating a good performance, they were honoring a woman who had kept her gift alive through decades of sacrifice and hardship. Margaret lifted her hands from the keys and looked out at the standing crowd. Tears were streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy and relief. After so many years of hiding her true self, she had finally been able to share her music with the world again. An elderly man in the front row stood up and called out, "Who are you? Who was your teacher?" Margaret wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "My name is Margaret Hoffman," she said. "I studied with Professor Heinrich Müller at the Vienna Conservatory from 1978 to 1980. A gasp went through the audience. Professor Müller had been a legend. His students included some of the most famous pianists of the past 50 years. To have studied with him meant that Margaret had once been considered a musician of extraordinary promise. "Why did you stop performing?" called out another voice from the crowd. Margaret took a deep breath. This was the hardest part of her story to tell. "My parents became very sick," she said. "I had to choose between my music and my family. I chose my family." The silence that followed her words was full of respect and understanding. Everyone in the hall realized that they had witnessed something extraordinary. They had not just heard beautiful music. They had learned about sacrifice and love and the incredible strength of the human spirit. Victor stepped forward slowly. His face showed shame and regret and something that might have been awe. He had to say something, but he was not sure what words could possibly be adequate for this moment. "Margaret," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's perfect acoustics, "I owe you an apology. I treated you with disrespect and cruelty. I judged you based on your job and your appearance instead of seeing who you really are. I am deeply sorry." Margaret looked at him with kind eyes. She could see that he truly regretted his behavior. "Thank you," she said simply. "Your apology is accepted." Victor shook his head. "That is not enough," he said. "What I did was wrong, and everyone here saw it. You have shown me what real musicianship looks like. You have shown me what it means to play with heart and soul instead of just technical skill." He turned to face the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "you have just heard one of the finest pianists in the world. Margaret Hoffman deserves recognition for her incredible talent and her years of sacrifice. She deserves opportunities to share her gift with many more people." The crowd burst into applause again. People were shouting yes and absolutely. They agreed completely with Victor's words. Margaret sat at the piano, overwhelmed by the response. She had never imagined that this evening would end like this. She had come here just to listen to music from her corner seat. Now she was being celebrated as a great musician by people who had never known she existed an hour ago. But the evening was not over yet. The most amazing part was still to come. As Margaret sat at the piano, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened, she noticed people in the audience taking out their phones. They were recording videos and taking pictures, not wanting this incredible moment to be forgotten. Woman near the front row was speaking quickly into her phone. Margaret could hear her saying, "You have to see this. A cleaning lady just played the most beautiful music I have ever heard. She used to study at the Vienna Conservatory. This is going to be everywhere by tomorrow morning." Margaret did not understand what the woman meant about things being everywhere, but she could see the excitement in people's faces. Something important was happening, something that would change her life in ways she could not yet imagine. Victor approached the piano again, but this time his manner was completely different. He was no longer the arrogant performer who had humiliated her earlier. He looked humble and respectful, like a student approaching a great teacher. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I hope you will forgive me for asking, but why have you never returned to performing? Your playing tonight shows that you never really stopped being a musician. You have been practicing all these years, haven't you?" Margaret shook her head. "I have not touched a piano in almost 50 years, she said. "I sold mine long ago to pay for my mother's medical care. But I have been listening. Every day at work I listen to the students and teachers. I practice the pieces in my mind while I clean. I have memorized hundreds of compositions just by hearing them performed." The audience gasped at this revelation. People found it almost impossible to believe that someone could maintain such incredible skill without actually practicing. But Margaret's performance had been too perfect to doubt. A distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit stood up in the third row. "Excuse me," he called out. "I am Robert Steinberg, director of the European Concert Series. Margaret, I would like to speak with you about performing with our organization. What you have done tonight is extraordinary." Another person stood up. "I am Maria Santos," she said. Margaret recognized the name immediately. This was the famous pianist Victor had criticized earlier in the evening. "Margaret, I would be honored to have you perform with me in a duet concert." Your playing is among the finest I have ever heard." More people began to stand and introduce themselves. There was a representative from a major recording company. There was a concert promoter who organized performances in the world's most famous halls. There was a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell Margaret's story. Margaret looked around at all these important people who suddenly wanted to work with her. Just an hour ago, she had been invisible to them. Now they were treating her like a celebrity. It was overwhelming and wonderful and frightening all at the same time. Victor raised his hand to get everyone's attention. "Please," he said, "let Margaret have a moment to process all of this. She has just given us an incredible gift. We should not overwhelm her with business discussions right now." Margaret smiled at him gratefully. Despite his earlier cruelty, Victor was now trying to protect her from being overwhelmed. She appreciated his consideration. But before anyone could respond to Victor's suggestion, Margaret's phone began to ring in her small purse. She looked at it in confusion. Who would be calling her at this time of night? The caller ID showed the name of Anna, one of the other cleaning ladies who worked at the academy. Anna was working tonight, helping to serve food and drinks at the reception. "Hello?" Margaret answered nervously. "Margaret?" Anna's excited voice was so loud that people nearby could hear her through the phone. "I am watching videos of you on my phone. People are posting them on the internet. There are already thousands of people watching you play. You are becoming famous." Margaret did not understand what Anna was talking about. She had never used the internet much and did not know about social media or viral videos. But she could hear the excitement in her friend's voice. "I am in the kitchen helping with the food," Anna continued. "But everyone back here is watching these videos and crying. Margaret, everyone in the world is going to know about your beautiful music." As Anna spoke, Margaret noticed that more and more people in the audience were looking at their phones and showing them to their neighbors. The videos of her performance were already spreading across the internet at incredible speed. A young woman in the front row held up her phone so Margaret could see the screen. "Look," she said. "This video of you playing has been shared over 1,000 times in just the past 10 minutes. People are calling it the most beautiful piano performance ever captured." Margaret stared at the phone screen. She could see herself, sitting at the piano, playing with complete concentration and joy. In the comments below the video, people from around the world were writing messages of amazement and appreciation. "This made me cry," wrote someone from Japan. "I have never heard anything so beautiful," wrote someone from Brazil. "This woman is a gift to the world," wrote someone from Australia. Over the next few hours, as people shared the videos and told their friends, Margaret's story spread around the globe. By morning, millions of people had watched her perform. News stations were calling the academy trying to find her. Music magazines were writing articles about the cleaning lady who shocked the world with her incredible talent. But that night, sitting at the piano with the audience still standing and applauding, Margaret was not thinking about fame or opportunity. She was thinking about how good it felt to share music again. She was thinking about how lucky she was to have been given this unexpected second chance. The academy's director, who had been watching from the back of the hall, approached the stage. "Margaret," he said, "I want to offer you a position here, as a piano instructor. We would be honored to have someone of your talent teaching our students." Margaret's eyes filled with tears again. After 15 years of cleaning the academy's floors, she was being offered the chance to teach music in the same halls where she had once only listened. "Thank you," she said. "I would love to accept." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, once more. Everyone was thrilled to know that Margaret would have the opportunity to share her knowledge and talent with young musicians. As the evening finally came to an end, people slowly began to leave the hall. But many stopped to speak with Margaret personally. They wanted to shake her hand and tell her how much her music had meant to them. An elderly woman approached with tears in her eyes. "My dear," she said, "your music reminded me why I fell in love with piano when I was a little girl. I had forgotten that feeling. Thank you for giving it back to me." A young man who looked like a music student said, "I have been struggling with my playing lately. I was thinking about giving up, but hearing you tonight showed me what music can really be. You have inspired me to keep working." One after another, people shared similar stories. Margaret's performance had not just entertained them, it had changed them. It had reminded them of the power of music to touch human hearts and souls. Victor was one of the last people to approach Margaret before leaving. He looked embarrassed and humble as he spoke to her. "Margaret," he said, "I learned something important tonight. I have spent years focusing on technical perfection and impressive performances, but I have never learned to play with the kind of heart and soul that you showed tonight. Would you consider giving me some lessons? I would like to learn from you." Margaret was surprised by his request. This world-famous pianist wanted to learn from her, a woman who had been cleaning his dressing room just hours earlier. "I would be happy to help you," she said kindly. "Music should always come from the heart. Technique is important, but it means nothing without genuine emotion." As the hall finally emptied, Margaret sat alone at the piano for a few more minutes. She played softly to herself, a simple melody that her mother used to hum when Margaret was a child. It felt like a prayer of gratitude for this incredible evening. Tomorrow, her life would be completely different. She would wake up famous around the world. She would have opportunities to perform and teach and record music. She would have the chance to inspire other people the way music had always inspired her. But tonight, she was just Margaret, sitting at a beautiful piano in a quiet concert hall, grateful beyond words that music had found its way back into her life. She played one final soft chord, and then closed the piano lid. Her hands lingered on the smooth black surface for a moment, hardly believing that this was real. Then she stood up, smoothed her simple blue dress, and walked toward the door. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. But tonight had been perfect. Tonight, music had reminded everyone in that hall what truly mattered in life. As Margaret turned off the lights and left the concert hall, she whispered, "Thank you." She was thanking Victor for his cruel joke that had led to this miracle. She was thanking her parents, whose love had required her sacrifice, but who would have been so proud to see this moment. Most of all, she was thanking music itself for never leaving her heart, even during all those years of silence. Margaret Hoffman, the cleaning lady who became a sensation, walked home through the quiet streets of Vienna with music still singing in her soul, and a bright new future waiting ahead of her.